of Rebecca Matthews, a respected prison warden who had dedicated 22 years of her life to the Texas correctional system. What they discovered inside would shake the very foundations of everything people thought they knew about prison security, trust, and the deadly consequences of secrets kept in the shadows. Rebecca Matthews lay motionless on her kitchen floor, a single gunshot wound to the back of her head. The woman who had commanded respect from both inmates and staff alike, who had been featured in the local newspaper just months earlier for her innovative rehabilitation programs, was now the victim of a calculated execution. But this wasn't a random break-in gone wrong. This wasn't a robbery. The truth behind Rebecca Matthews' murder would expose a web of forbidden relationships, deadly deception, and a secret so dangerous that someone was willing to kill to keep it buried forever. The shocking revelation. Her death was tied to an HIV-positive inmate named Marcus Johnson, a man serving 15 years for armed robbery who had somehow managed to manipulate the very person meant to keep him locked away. This wasn't just a crime of passion, it was something far more complex, something that would reveal the darkest corners of institutional corruption and the fatal price of crossing lines that should never be crossed. Before we continue with this shocking story, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Rebecca Matthews had always been different from other prison administrators. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches with steel gray hair pulled back in a tight bun, she carried herself with the kind of quiet authority that made hardened criminals think twice before testing her patience. Born in rural East Texas to a family of law enforcement officers, Rebecca had witnessed firsthand the cycle of crime and incarceration that plagued her community. Her father, Sheriff William Matthews, had instilled in her a deep sense of justice tempered with compassion, a combination that would both define her career and ultimately lead to her downfall. After graduating with a degree in criminal justice from Sam Houston State University, Rebecca started as a correctional officer at the Wynn Unit in Huntsville. She quickly distinguished herself from her peers through her unique approach to inmate management. While other officers relied on intimidation and force, Rebecca believed in firm but fair treatment, often spending extra time talking to inmates about their families, their hopes for release, and their plans for rehabilitation. Her colleagues sometimes whispered that she was too soft, too trusting, but the results spoke for themselves. Units under Rebecca's supervision had lower rates of violence, fewer disciplinary incidents, and surprisingly, higher success rates for inmates who completed educational programs. By 2018, Rebecca had risen through the ranks to become warden of the Henderson Correctional Facility, a medium-security prison housing 2,400 inmates. The facility had a reputation for being one of the more progressive institutions in the Texas system, offering vocational training, substance abuse counseling, and even a college degree program. Rebecca's philosophy was simple: treat people with dignity, and they're more likely to respond with respect. It was a philosophy that earned her recognition from the state legislature, praise from reform advocates, and the unwavering loyalty of her staff. What nobody realized was that this same philosophy of seeing the humanity in every inmate would create the perfect conditions for a predator to exploit her trust. Rebecca's personal life was as structured and disciplined as her professional one. She lived alone in a modest home 15 minutes from the prison, having never married despite several long-term relationships that ended when partners grew tired of competing with her dedication to her work. Her evenings were spent reviewing case files, preparing reports, and planning new programs for inmate rehabilitation. Friends described her as intensely private, someone who carried the weight of responsibility for every person under her care. She would often say that being a warden meant being responsible for both protecting society from dangerous individuals and protecting those same individuals from becoming more dangerous than they already were. It was a delicate balance that required constant vigilance, unwavering judgment, and the ability to maintain professional boundaries no matter how compelling the circumstances might be. Marcus Johnson arrived at Henderson Correctional Facility in January 2019, And from the moment he walked through those gates, he was different from the typical inmate. At 34 years old, Marcus possessed a rare combination of street smarts and intellectual curiosity that made him stand out in a population where education and articulation were often viewed with suspicion. Standing 6 feet tall with an athletic build maintained through religious adherence to the prison's workout schedule, Marcus had the kind of easy smile and confident demeanor that could charm both inmates and staff members alike. But behind that charismatic exterior lay a calculating mind that had spent years learning how to read people, how to identify their weaknesses, and how to exploit those weaknesses for his own benefit. Marcus's criminal history painted the picture of a man who had made a series of increasingly serious mistakes. He had started with petty theft as a teenager, graduated to drug dealing in his 20s, and finally been sentenced to 15 years for armed robbery after holding up 3 convenience stores in Houston. But what made Marcus dangerous wasn't his willingness to use violence, it was his ability to make people believe he was something he wasn't. During his trial, character witnesses had described him as a devoted son who had simply fallen in with the wrong crowd, a narrative Marcus had carefully cultivated to minimize his sentence. Even his own attorney had been convinced that Marcus was truly remorseful and committed to turning his life around. Within weeks of arriving at Henderson, Marcus had positioned himself as an informal leader among the inmates. He volunteered for every available program, from literacy tutoring to anger management classes, and his enthusiasm seemed genuine to everyone who interacted with him. He spoke eloquently about the mistakes he had made, the harm he had caused to his victims, and his determination to use his time in prison to become a better person. Marcus had a particular talent for making staff members feel special, for making them believe they were the ones who truly understood him, who could see past his criminal record to the good man he claimed to be underneath. He asked thoughtful questions about their families, remembered details about their lives outside the prison, and always seemed genuinely interested in their well-being. What nobody knew, not even Marcus's closest associates, was that he had been diagnosed with HIV 3 years earlier during a routine medical examination at his previous facility. The diagnosis had been devastating, not just because of the health implications, but because Marcus knew it would make him a target for discrimination and violence from other inmates. He had managed to keep his status secret by bribing a medical clerk to alter his records, a deception that had followed him to Henderson. Marcus viewed his HIV status not as a consequence of his reckless lifestyle, but as another obstacle to overcome, another secret to weaponize if the opportunity arose. He had spent months studying everything he could about HIV transmission, treatment protocols, and legal implications, not out of concern for public health, but because knowledge was power, and Marcus Johnson was always looking for new sources of power. The combination of Marcus's charm, intelligence, and hidden medical status created a perfect storm of deception that would prove impossible for even an experienced warden like Rebecca Matthews to detect. He understood intuitively that the key to manipulating authority figures was to make them feel important, to make them believe they were making a difference in his life. Marcus had identified Rebecca as his primary target within days of his arrival, and he began the slow, methodical process of earning her trust, confident that his patients would eventually be rewarded with opportunities that other inmates could never imagine. The relationship between Rebecca Matthews and Marcus Johnson began innocuously enough, the way most institutional scandals do, with small compromises that seem reasonable at the time, but create pathways for increasingly serious violations. It started during one of Rebecca's routine walks through the facility, something she did twice weekly to maintain visibility and open communication with both staff and inmates. Marcus had approached her with what seemed like a legitimate concern about the prison's educational programs, suggesting improvements that demonstrated both his intelligence and his commitment to helping other inmates succeed. Rebecca was impressed by Marcus's articulate presentation and genuine-seeming concern for his fellow inmates. She began stopping by his cell during her rounds, initially to discuss program improvements, but gradually expanding into conversations about philosophy, literature, and social reform. Marcus had clearly spent time educating himself during his incarceration, and he could hold sophisticated discussions about everything from criminal justice theory to contemporary politics. For Rebecca, who rarely had opportunities to engage in intellectual conversations within the prison environment, these discussions became a welcome respite from the daily grind of administrative responsibilities and disciplinary issues. The conversations gradually became more personal. Marcus would ask about Rebecca's background, her motivations for working in corrections, and her thoughts on the possibility of genuine rehabilitation. He seemed fascinated by her perspective as someone who had dedicated her career to the system while maintaining optimism about human potential for change. Rebecca found herself sharing stories about her childhood, her father's influence on her career choice, and her frustrations with a system that often seemed more focused on punishment than rehabilitation. Marcus was an exceptional listener, offering insights and perspectives that made Rebecca feel understood in ways she hadn't experienced in years. What Rebecca didn't realize was that every personal detail she shared was being cataloged and analyzed by Marcus, who was building a psychological profile that would allow him to manipulate her emotions more effectively. He learned about her loneliness, her dedication to her work at the expense of personal relationships, and her deep-seated need to believe that she was making a positive difference in people's lives. Marcus understood that Rebecca's greatest strength, her empathy, was also her greatest vulnerability. He began crafting a narrative about his own transformation, describing in vivid detail how their conversations were helping him understand himself better and inspiring him to become the man he knew he could be. The turning point came during a particularly difficult period when Rebecca was dealing with budget cuts that threatened several of her rehabilitation programs. Marcus somehow learned about her struggles and offered to help by organizing inmate support for the programs, demonstrating their value through testimonials and participation rates. His assistance proved invaluable, and Rebecca found herself relying on his insights and advice more frequently. She began to see Marcus not as an inmate under her supervision, but as a collaborator in the important work of prison reform. The physical relationship began with seemingly innocent touches during their conversations. Marcus would gently place his hand on Rebecca's arm while making a point, or stand slightly closer than protocol dictated during their discussions. Rebecca noticed these gestures but rationalized them as natural expressions of gratitude and friendship. She told herself that maintaining some human connection was important for both of their well-being, and that their relationship was helping Marcus maintain his commitment to positive change. By the time Rebecca realized how far she had crossed professional boundaries, she was already emotionally invested in a relationship that was fundamentally incompatible with her responsibilities as warden. The relationship remained secret for months, with Marcus and Rebecca meeting in the warden's office after hours, communicating through carefully coded messages and finding brief moments of physical contact during official interactions. Rebecca convinced herself that their connection was helping Marcus's rehabilitation while ignoring the obvious ethical violations and security risks their relationship created. She had fallen into the classic trap of believing she was the exception, that her situation was different from other cases of staff misconduct she had dealt with throughout her career. If you're still following the story, drop a comment with, "Still here. Let's see who's really watching this far." The discovery that would ultimately lead to Rebecca Matthews' murder came on a warm evening in September 2022, nearly 3 years after Marcus Johnson's arrival at Henderson Correctional Facility. Rebecca had been feeling unusually fatigued for several weeks, experiencing symptoms she initially attributed to stress from ongoing budget negotiations with the state legislature. When the fatigue was accompanied by a persistent low-grade fever and swollen lymph nodes, she decided to see her personal physician, Dr. Sarah Chen, for what she expected would be a routine checkup and perhaps a prescription for antibiotics. Dr. Chen's examination revealed nothing obviously wrong, but given Rebecca's symptoms and her age, she recommended a comprehensive blood panel to rule out any underlying conditions. Rebecca agreed, thinking it would provide peace of mind and perhaps identify a simple explanation for her recent lack of energy. The blood was drawn on a Thursday afternoon, and Dr. Chen promised the results would be available by the following Tuesday. Rebecca returned to work, continuing her regular routine while looking forward to getting a clean bill of health that would allow her to refocus on her professional responsibilities. The phone call came at 8:30 a.m. on Tuesday morning. Dr. Chen's voice was professionally calm, but carried an undertone that immediately put Rebecca on alert. The doctor asked if Rebecca could come in that afternoon for a follow-up appointment to discuss her test results, and when pressed for details, Dr. Chen said only that there were some findings that required immediate attention. Rebecca's heart began racing as she considered the possibilities, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to learn. Sitting in Dr. Chen's office that afternoon, Rebecca listened in stunned silence as the doctor explained that her blood test had returned positive for HIV antibodies. The diagnosis was confirmed through additional testing, and Dr. Chen estimated that based on the viral load and other indicators, Rebecca had likely been infected within the past 18 to 24 months. The doctor began discussing treatment options, the importance of immediate antiretroviral therapy, and the need to identify and notify any potential sexual partners, but Rebecca barely heard the words. Her mind was racing through the implications of the diagnosis, and there was only one possible source of infection: Marcus Johnson. The drive back to the prison was a blur of rage, fear, and disbelief. Rebecca's hands trembled on the steering wheel as she processed the magnitude of Marcus's betrayal. He had known about his HIV status and had deliberately concealed it during their intimate relationship, exposing her to a potentially life-threatening infection without giving her the opportunity to make an informed choice about the risks. The man she had trusted, the man she had believed was genuinely committed to positive change, had been using her from the very beginning. Every conversation they had shared, every moment of intimacy, had been built on a foundation of calculated deception designed to serve his own selfish interests. When Rebecca confronted Marcus in her office that evening, his reaction was everything she had feared and worse. Instead of showing remorse or even surprise at her discovery, Marcus responded with cold calculation. He reminded Rebecca that their relationship was already a serious violation of prison protocols that could end her career and result in criminal charges. He suggested that if she reported his HIV status or attempted to end their relationship, he would be forced to reveal details about their affair to prison investigators, complete with documentation he had been secretly collecting for months. Marcus had photographs, voice recordings, and even video footage of their encounters, creating an insurance policy that would protect him from retaliation while potentially destroying Rebecca's life and career. The revelation of Marcus's blackmail scheme was perhaps even more devastating than the HIV diagnosis itself. Rebecca realized that she had been manipulated by a master predator who had identified her vulnerabilities and exploited them with ruthless efficiency. She understood that Marcus had never cared about rehabilitation or positive change. He had simply been playing a long game designed to give him power over the person who controlled his daily existence. The man she had believed she was helping had been systematically destroying her life, while she remained completely unaware of his true intentions. Following the devastating discovery of her HIV diagnosis and Marcus's blackmail scheme, Rebecca Matthews found herself trapped in an impossible situation that grew more complex with each passing day. The psychological pressure of maintaining her professional facade while dealing with the reality of her diagnosis and the constant threat of exposure created a level of stress that began affecting every aspect of her life. She started making uncharacteristic mistakes at work, becoming short-tempered with staff members who had always known her as patient and understanding. Her assistant, Linda Rodriguez, noticed the change immediately, but attributed it to the ongoing budget pressures that had been consuming much of Rebecca's attention. Marcus Johnson, meanwhile, was enjoying his newfound power over the warden with the same cold calculation he had demonstrated throughout their relationship. He began making increasingly bold demands, requesting special privileges that other inmates would never receive, and using their secret communications to manipulate prison policies in subtle but significant ways. Marcus understood that he held all the cards in their relationship, and he used that knowledge to push boundaries that tested Rebecca's ability to maintain control over her own facility. He would sometimes smile at her during official interactions, a reminder of the secrets they shared that made Rebecca's skin crawl with revulsion. The blackmail extended beyond their personal relationship to affect the entire operation of Henderson Correctional Facility. Marcus began using his influence over Rebecca to protect other inmates who were willing to pay for his services, creating a shadow economy within the prison that operated under the warden's unwitting protection. He arranged for certain inmates to receive better work assignments, access to contraband items, and even advance warning about upcoming searches or disciplinary actions. Rebecca gradually became aware that something was wrong with the facility's operations, but she couldn't identify the source of the problems without risking exposure of her own involvement with Marcus. The situation reached a crisis point when Rebecca learned that Marcus had been sharing details about their relationship with select inmates, not to expose their affair publicly, but to demonstrate his power and recruit accomplices for his various schemes. Rebecca discovered that at least 3 other inmates knew about her compromised position and were using that knowledge to gain advantages within the prison system. The realization that her secret was spreading beyond her control filled Rebecca with a panic that made it impossible for her to think clearly about potential solutions. Rebecca's attempts to regain control of the situation only made things worse. She tried to transfer Marcus to another facility, but he threatened immediate exposure if the transfer proceeded. She considered reporting the relationship herself, hoping that voluntary disclosure might minimize the consequences, but Marcus made it clear that he had evidence suggesting she had initiated their affair and had been using her position to coerce him into sexual activity. The recordings and photographs he had collected could be edited and presented in ways that would make Rebecca appear to be the predator rather than the victim, potentially resulting in criminal charges rather than just administrative discipline. The constant stress began taking a severe toll on Rebecca's physical and mental health. Her HIV medication caused side effects that she struggled to hide from her colleagues, and the ongoing psychological pressure created symptoms that resembled severe depression and anxiety. She started avoiding social interactions outside of work, canceled plans with friends, and withdrew from professional organizations where she had once been an active participant. Those closest to Rebecca noticed the changes, but respected her privacy, assuming she was dealing with work-related stress or perhaps a personal health issue that she preferred to keep private. As word of the problems at Henderson Correctional Facility began reaching the state level, Rebecca realized that an investigation was inevitable. Internal audits would eventually uncover the irregularities in facility operations, and any serious investigation would likely expose her relationship with Marcus. She understood that her career was effectively over, regardless of how the situation ultimately played out. But she also knew that Marcus's threats meant she couldn't simply resign and hope the scandal would remain buried. The web of deception that had started with what she believed was a meaningful connection with a rehabilitating inmate had evolved into a nightmare that threatened to destroy not just her professional reputation, but potentially her freedom and her life. By February 2023, Rebecca Matthews had reached her breaking point. The combination of managing her HIV diagnosis, dealing with Marcus Johnson's escalating demands, and maintaining her professional responsibilities had pushed her beyond her psychological limits. She had spent sleepless nights researching legal options, considering whether she could find a way to expose Marcus's schemes without destroying her own life in the process. Rebecca had consulted with attorneys through hypothetical scenarios, researched whistleblower protections, and even considered contacting federal authorities about corruption within the prison system. Each potential solution seemed to create new problems, and Rebecca found herself trapped in a maze of legal and ethical complications with no clear path to freedom. The final confrontation was precipitated by Marcus's most audacious demand yet. During a routine meeting in Rebecca's office, Marcus informed her that he expected to be released on parole at his next hearing, despite having served less than 4 years of his 15-year sentence. He made it clear that Rebecca would need to provide a glowing recommendation for his release, using her influence with the parole board to ensure his application was approved. Marcus explained that his freedom was in both of their best interests, as it would eliminate the daily risk of their relationship being discovered while allowing him to maintain his silence about their affair indefinitely. Rebecca's response was immediate and decisive. She told Marcus that she would rather face the consequences of their relationship being exposed than help him manipulate the parole system to gain early release. She had realized that allowing Marcus to leave prison would not end her nightmare, but would actually make it worse, as he would be free to contact her, threaten her, and potentially harm other women while using the leverage he held over her to avoid consequences for his actions. Rebecca made it clear that their relationship was over and that she would no longer provide him with special privileges or protection within the prison system. Marcus's reaction to Rebecca's defiance was swift and terrifying. His charming facade disappeared entirely, replaced by the cold anger of a predator who had lost control over his victim. He reminded Rebecca that he had spent years documenting their relationship and building a case that would paint her as the aggressor and him as the victim. Marcus described in detail how he would present their affair to investigators, media outlets, and potentially prosecutors, emphasizing how a female warden in a position of power had seduced and exploited a vulnerable male inmate. He made it clear that he would destroy her reputation, her career, and potentially her freedom if she didn't continue to cooperate with his demands. The conversation escalated to threats of physical violence when Rebecca refused to change her position. Marcus reminded her that he had connections throughout the prison system and could arrange for her to be harmed even if he remained locked up. He described how easy it would be for someone to follow her home from work, how vulnerable she was living alone, and how many ways a person could be hurt without leaving obvious evidence of foul play. Marcus's threats were delivered with the calm confidence of someone who had thought through various scenarios and was prepared to act on his promises. Rebecca's decision to record their final conversation would ultimately provide crucial evidence for investigators, though she didn't live long enough to see Marcus prosecuted for her murder. Using a smartphone she had hidden in her desk drawer, Rebecca captured nearly 30 minutes of Marcus's threats and admissions, including his acknowledgement of his HIV status, his deliberate concealment of his medical condition during their relationship, and his plans to continue manipulating the prison system through blackmail and intimidation. The recording revealed the full extent of Marcus's calculated predation and provided law enforcement with the evidence they would need to build a case against him. The meeting ended with Rebecca informing Marcus that their relationship was permanently terminated and that she would be taking steps to protect herself from his threats. She made it clear that she was prepared to face the consequences of their affair becoming public, rather than continue enabling his manipulation of the prison system. Marcus's final words to Rebecca were a promise that she would regret her decision, and that he had resources and connections she couldn't imagine. Neither of them knew that within 2 weeks, Rebecca would be dead, and Marcus would be facing charges not just for blackmail and corruption, but for first-degree murder. The investigation into Rebecca Matthews' murder began immediately after her body was discovered by Linda Rodriguez, her administrative assistant, who had become concerned when Rebecca failed to show up for an important meeting with state prison officials. Linda had called Rebecca's cell phone repeatedly before deciding to drive to her house, where she found the front door unlocked and Rebecca's body in the kitchen. The professional execution-style killing, with a single gunshot to the back of the head, immediately suggested that this was not a random crime, but a targeted assassination carried out by someone with both motive and access to firearms. Detective Sarah Walsh of the Huntsville Police Department was assigned as lead investigator, and her 23 years of experience in criminal investigations told her that the key to solving Rebecca's murder lay in understanding her personal and professional relationships. The crime scene offered few physical clues, suggesting that the killer had been careful to avoid leaving evidence that could be traced back to them. However, Detective Walsh noticed that Rebecca's home office had been searched, with papers scattered and filing cabinets left open, indicating that the killer had been looking for specific documents or information that might incriminate them. The breakthrough in the investigation came when Detective Walsh gained access to Rebecca's work computer and discovered the hidden audio recording of her final conversation with Marcus Johnson. The recording provided not only a clear motive for murder, but also evidence of the complex criminal conspiracy that had been operating within Henderson Correctional Facility. Detective Walsh immediately recognized that Marcus's threats against Rebecca, combined with his documented history of manipulation and violence, made him the primary suspect in her murder. However, proving his involvement would require establishing how he had arranged for the killing to be carried out while he remained incarcerated. The investigation revealed that Marcus had been using his influence with other inmates to arrange for criminal activities both inside and outside the prison. Through a network of inmates with connections to street gangs and organized crime, Marcus had been able to orchestrate various illegal activities that generated income and favors he could use to maintain his power within the prison system. Detective Walsh discovered that Marcus had specifically recruited inmates who were nearing release or had associates on the outside who could carry out tasks that required freedom of movement. The most damaging evidence against Marcus came from Devin Williams, an inmate who had been released from Henderson Correctional Facility just 3 weeks before Rebecca's murder. When confronted with evidence of his involvement in the conspiracy, Devin agreed to cooperate with investigators in exchange for a reduced sentence on unrelated charges. Devin revealed that Marcus had approached him 6 months before his release with a proposition that would provide him with money and protection in exchange for carrying out a specific task once he was free. Marcus had provided Devin with detailed information about Rebecca's daily routines, her home address, and the security measures he would need to overcome to gain access to her house. Devin's testimony revealed the calculated nature of Rebecca's murder and the extent of Marcus's criminal network. Marcus had spent months planning the assassination, using his intimate knowledge of Rebecca's habits and vulnerabilities to ensure the attack would be successful. Devin described how Marcus had provided him with a key to Rebecca's house, information he had obtained during his relationship with her, and specific instructions about how to make the murder appear to be a robbery gone wrong. The plan had been for Devin to search Rebecca's home office for any evidence of their relationship before killing her, ensuring that Marcus's secrets would be protected even after her death. The investigation also uncovered evidence of Marcus's HIV status and his deliberate concealment of his medical condition during his relationship with Rebecca. Medical records confirmed that Marcus had been diagnosed with HIV at his previous facility and had bribed medical personnel to alter his records before his transfer to Henderson. This evidence not only established additional motives for murder, but also provided the basis for charges related to the intentional transmission of HIV and conspiracy to commit fraud. Detective Walsh realized that Rebecca Matthews had been the victim of a predator who had used every tool at his disposal, including deadly deception about his medical status, to exploit and ultimately destroy her. The case also sparked broader discussions about the challenges facing correctional institutions in balancing rehabilitation goals with security requirements. Criminal justice reform advocates argued that the tragedy highlighted the need for better support systems for both inmates and staff members, while others suggested that the case demonstrated the inherent dangers of treating dangerous criminals as candidates for redemption. The debate continues to this day, with Rebecca Matthews' story serving as a cautionary tale about the complexity of human nature and the deadly consequences that can result when trust is betrayed in the most calculated and cruel ways imaginable. Meet Carla Jennings, 25 years old, the youngest female warden ever appointed in the Texas correctional system. Fresh out of her master's program in criminal justice, Carla had been handpicked for her innovative approach to prisoner rehabilitation and her unwavering belief that even the most hardened criminals could find redemption. She was everything the old system wasn't: compassionate, progressive, and determined to prove that treating inmates with dignity could reduce recidivism rates. Her colleagues admired her passion, her superiors praised her results, and the media hailed her as the future of corrections. But in just 18 months, Carla Jennings would be dead, and the circumstances surrounding her death would expose secrets that no one saw coming. Then there's Derrick Malone, 26 years old, serving 8 years for aggravated assault, but his criminal record only told part of the story. Derrick had a past full of secrets that even his own family didn't know about. Secrets that he had spent years burying. Secrets that could destroy lives if they ever came to light. To most people at Pine Ridge Correctional Center, Derrick appeared to be the perfect example of successful rehabilitation. He was articulate, remorseful, and seemed genuinely committed to turning his life around. But appearances can be deceiving, and Derrick Malone had perfected the art of deception long before he ever set foot in prison. The questions that emerged from this case continue to haunt investigators, journalists, and criminal justice experts to this day. How did an inmate with no apparent influence or resources gain such complete control over a respected warden that she was willing to risk everything for him? What kind of psychological manipulation could be so powerful that it would cause an intelligent, educated woman to throw away her career, her reputation, and ultimately her life? These weren't two people from similar backgrounds who happened to meet under different circumstances. This was a federal crime in progress, a violation of every principle that governs the correctional system. But the most disturbing question of all centers on the final 72 hours of Carla Jennings' life. What happened during those 3 days between the moment their affair was exposed by a security camera and the morning her body was discovered in her apartment? Was this a calculated murder carried out by someone who had everything to lose if the truth came out? Was it a tragic suicide by a woman who couldn't face the destruction of everything she had worked for? Or was it something even more twisted, something that investigators are still trying to understand? The evidence would eventually reveal that Carla's death was just the tip of the iceberg, the final act in a drama that had been unfolding for months behind the concrete walls and razor wire of Pine Ridge Correctional Center. There were other victims, other secrets, and other players in this story who had their own reasons for wanting Carla Jennings silenced forever. The deeper investigators looked, the more they realized that nothing about this case was what it seemed, and that the charming, reformed inmate and the idealistic young warden were just two pieces in a much larger and more dangerous game. As we conclude this tragic story of betrayal, manipulation, and murder, it's important to reflect on the broader implications of what happened to Carla Jennings and the lessons that can be learned from her experience. This case represents far more than a simple story of professional misconduct gone wrong. It reveals the complex psychological dynamics that can develop within institutional settings and the ways in which predators can exploit the very systems designed to contain and rehabilitate them. Carla's story forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about human nature, institutional responsibility, and the price of placing trust in individuals who may not deserve it. The question that haunts many people who hear this story is whether Carla Jennings could have done anything differently to protect herself from Derrick Malone's manipulation. It's easy to judge her decisions from the safety of hindsight, but the reality is that she was dealing with a master manipulator who had spent years studying human psychology and perfecting his ability to exploit emotional vulnerabilities. Derrick understood exactly how to present himself as someone deserving of trust and compassion, and he used that knowledge to destroy a woman who had dedicated her life to helping others find their way back to society. Think about your own life for a moment. Have you ever found yourself trusting someone who later betrayed that trust in ways you never imagined possible? Have you ever been in a situation where someone you cared about turned out to be fundamentally different from the person they presented themselves to be? Carla Jennings' experience represents an extreme version of something that happens to people in all walks of life. The discovery that someone we trusted has been using that trust to harm us in ways we couldn't have anticipated. Consider the psychological impact of learning that someone you cared about had deliberately exposed you to a life-threatening disease while manipulating you for their own benefit. How would you handle the rage, the fear, and the sense of betrayal that Carla must have experienced when she discovered Derrick's true nature? Would you have been able to maintain your composure and continue performing your professional duties while dealing with such devastating personal revelations? The strength Carla showed in trying to document the truth, even while knowing it might cost her life, demonstrates a level of courage that few of us will ever be tested to display. The story also raises important questions about institutional responsibility and the systems we put in place to protect both the people who work in corrections and the inmates under their supervision. Should there have been better screening procedures that would have identified Derrick as a potential threat? Were there warning signs that staff members missed or chose to ignore? How can correctional facilities balance the goal of treating inmates with dignity and respect while maintaining the security measures necessary to prevent manipulation and abuse? As you think about this story and its implications, ask yourself, what would you have done if you were in Carla Jennings's position? How would you have handled the discovery of Derrick's betrayal and his threats against your safety and career? Do you think there was any way Carla could have escaped the trap Derrick had created, or was she doomed from the moment she allowed their professional relationship to become personal? These are not easy questions to answer, but they are important ones to consider as we try to understand how a dedicated public servant became the victim of such a calculated and cruel crime. The legacy of Carla Jennings should not be defined solely by the mistakes she made in trusting Derrick Malone, but also by the passion and dedication she brought to reforming the correctional system. Her story serves as a reminder that even good people can fall victim to evil, and that the consequences of such victimization can extend far beyond the individuals directly involved. As you go about your own life, remember Carla's story and the importance of maintaining appropriate boundaries, trusting your instincts about people who seem too good to be true, and never underestimating the potential for human cruelty disguised as human kindness. So before you go, make sure you like this video to help us reach more true crime lovers just like you. Share it with someone who needs to hear this unbelievable case. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the stories we uncover here. Because if this story proved anything, it's that the truth has a way of clawing itself back to the surface, no matter how deep it's buried. Stay tuned. The next chapter may just be the one that keeps you awake tonight.